The scream tore through the forest before Elena Whitmore even saw the danger coming. She was running, bare feet slicing against frozen ground, her breath ragged, her heart slamming against her ribs like a war drum. Behind her, the growls of the Ashford pack echoed through the trees, closing in with every second. She had left her territory to gather herbs for her sick grandmother, a simple errand that had turned into a hunt where she was the prey. A branch cut across her cheek. She stumbled, caught herself, kept moving. There was no pack behind her, no Alpha to call for help, no Luna to send warriors. Her bloodline was weak, thinned by generations of exile, and everyone in the Northern Territories knew it. The Whitmore name meant nothing anymore. It was a target. She heard the snap of jaws just behind her shoulder, and knew, with sudden clarity, that she was going to die in these woods. Then the world exploded with heat and fury. A massive gray wolf slammed into the Ashford wolf, chasing her, throwing it sideways into a tree with a crack that silenced the forest. Elena fell to her knees, gasping, as more wolves poured from the shadows, moving with the discipline of soldiers who had trained together for years. The Blackthorn pack. She recognized their colors even in wolf form, the streak of silver fur that marked their bloodline. The gray wolf that had saved her shifted, and standing before her was a man unlike any she had ever seen. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair damp against his forehead, and eyes the color of storm clouds. He knelt in front of her, his voice low and steady, despite the chaos still unfolding around them. "You're safe now," he said. "Nobody touches what belongs to Blackthorn land." Elena opened her mouth to explain that she did not belong to anyone, that she was simply passing through, when the air between them shifted. It was a pull she had heard about in stories but never believed, a thread pulling tight from her chest to his. His eyes widened, and she knew he felt it too. "Mate," he whispered, as if testing the word for the first time. His name was Damien Voss, heir to the Blackthorn pack, and within the hour, he had carried her back to his territory himself, refusing to let any of his warriors touch her. The pack healer tended her wounds while Damien paced outside the door, and when Elena finally stepped out, wrapped in a warm cloak that was not her own, the entire courtyard had gone silent. Word spread through the pack faster than fire through dry grass. The heir Alpha had found his fated mate, and she was a Whitmore, the last of a broken bloodline everyone had assumed would fade into nothing. That night, under a sky thick with stars, Damien gathered the pack in the central square. Elena stood beside him, still unsure of her footing in this new world, when he took her hand in front of hundreds of watching eyes. "This is Elena," he announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard with the authority of a man born to lead. "She is my mate, and she will be your Luna. I make this promise before all of you, before the moon that binds us, and before my ancestors who watch tonight. I will protect her with everything I have. I will never let harm come to her. I will never let her stand alone." The pack howled in acknowledgement, a sound that rippled through Elena's chest like thunder. For the first time in her life, she felt something she had never known before. She felt wanted. She felt safe. She felt like she belonged somewhere. She did not know yet how quickly a promise could turn to ash. The weeks that followed felt like a dream Elena was afraid to wake from. Damien introduced her to every corner of his territory, walked her through the training grounds where warriors sparred at dawn, showed her the healing house where the elderly received care, and brought her to the high cliffs where the pack gathered to howl at the full moon. He was patient with her, teaching her the customs she had never learned growing up in exile, correcting her gently when she made mistakes, and defending her fiercely when the older council members questioned whether a Whitmore was fit to stand beside an Alpha. "She is not just fit," he told the council one evening, his voice sharp enough to end the debate. "She is chosen. The moon does not make mistakes." Elena began to trust him completely. She trained with the pack's healers to strengthen her own abilities, small as they were compared to full-blooded wolves. She learned the names of every family in the territory, memorized the histories of old feuds and alliances, and slowly began to understand what it meant to lead. Damien would find her in the evenings, exhausted from a day of lessons, and pull her into his arms with a tenderness that made her forget every hardship of her past. "You are going to be the greatest Luna this pack has ever known," he told her one night, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I promise you that." Elena believed him. She believed every word. It was during one of these quiet evenings that she first noticed her. Serafina Cole moved through the pack halls like a soft breeze, always dressed in pale colors, always speaking in a voice just above a whisper. She was an omega, delicate in build, with wide green eyes that seemed permanently on the edge of tears. Elena had heard she was Damien's childhood friend, someone he had grown up beside since they were pups running through these same halls. The first time Elena saw them together, Serafina was laughing softly at something Damien had said, her hand resting on his forearm in a way that seemed innocent enough. Elena told herself it was nothing. Old friends were allowed to be close. She had no reason to feel the small twist in her stomach. But it happened again the next week, and the week after that. Serafina always seemed to know exactly where Damien would be. She would appear at his study door with tea she had made herself, or find him at the training grounds with some small gift, always delivered with downcast eyes and a soft apology for interrupting. "She's like a little sister to me," Damien explained once, when Elena asked, careful to keep her tone light. "Her family has always been close to mine. She lost her mother young. I suppose I've always looked out for her." Elena wanted to believe that was all it was. She told herself that jealousy was an ugly thing, that she had no right to feel threatened by a woman who had done nothing wrong. But something in her instincts, something old and wolf-born, whispered a warning she could not quite silence. She began to notice small things, the way Serafina's tears could appear and disappear with startling speed, vanishing the moment Damien left the room. The way she would go quiet and small whenever Elena was near, only to become animated and warm the second Damien's attention returned to her. The way other pack members spoke of her, with a strange mixture of pity and reverence, as if she were something fragile that needed protecting at all costs. Elena mentioned her concerns once to Marla, an older wolf who had served as the pack's head healer for over 20 years and had become something of a friend during Elena's training. "Be careful with that one," Marla said quietly, glancing toward the door before continuing. "Serafina has always known how to make herself the center of every room. I've watched her do it since she was a child, cry a little, and every wolf in the territory forgets what actually happened." "Does Damien know?" Elena asked. Marla's expression turned troubled. "Damien has known her his whole life. Sometimes that makes it harder to see clearly, not easier." The words settled uneasily in Elena's chest, but she pushed them aside. She had a pack to learn, a territory to understand, a role to grow into. She told herself she would keep her eyes open, but she would not let baseless suspicion poison what she and Damien had built. Then came the evening that changed everything. Elena had been walking back from the healing house after helping Marla prepare remedies for the coming winter season, when she passed by the eastern garden and heard voices. She recognized Serafina's soft tone immediately, followed by Damien's low, familiar voice. Something made her pause behind the hedge, though she would later question whether she should have. "You always know how to make me feel better," Serafina was saying, her voice trembling in that particular way that Elena had come to recognize as performance, rather than genuine feeling. "I don't know what I would do without you, Damien. Sometimes I wonder if things had been different between us. If we had just—" "Serafina," Damien interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "You know I love Elena. She is my mate." "I know," Serafina whispered, and Elena could hear the practiced catch in her breath. "I just worry about you, that's all. She's still learning our ways. I worry she doesn't understand everything you need." Elena stepped out from behind the hedge before she could stop herself, unable to listen to another word. Both of them turned, and she watched Serafina's expression shift instantly, tears welling up as if summoned on command. "Elena, I didn't mean anything by it," Serafina said quickly, her voice small and wounded. "I only care about Damien's happiness. Please don't think." "I heard what you said," Elena replied, keeping her voice level despite the storm building inside her. "I'm not upset that you care about him. I'm asking that you be honest about what kind of care you mean." Serafina's tears spilled over immediately, and she took a step back, as if Elena had struck her. "I would never try to come between the two of you. I can't believe you would think that of me." Damien moved quickly to Serafina's side, his hand hovering near her shoulder in a gesture of comfort that made something in Elena's chest go cold. "Elena, she didn't mean any harm. "You're overreacting." "I'm not overreacting, Damien. I heard the conversation myself. She's emotional. Her mother's passing is still difficult for her, and I think you misunderstood the context." His voice carried a note of warning, a suggestion that Elena should let the matter drop. Elena studied his face for a long moment, searching for the man who had promised, in front of the entire pack, that she would never stand alone. She found him still standing there, but his attention, his instinct to protect, had shifted somewhere else entirely. "I'm not trying to start a conflict," Elena said finally, forcing her voice to stay calm. "I only want you to see clearly." "I do see clearly," Damien replied, though his eyes did not quite meet hers. "I see two people I care about who are struggling to get along. That's all this is." Serafina wiped delicately at her eyes, careful not to smudge anything, and offered Elena a trembling smile that did not reach the coldness underneath. "I hope we can be friends someday, Elena. I really do." Elena said nothing. She turned and walked back toward the main hall, her thoughts racing, her heart heavy, with a feeling she could not yet name. Behind her, she heard Damien's voice, soft and consoling, still speaking to Serafina. That night, lying beside Damien in the dark, Elena stared at the ceiling, long after his breathing had evened into sleep. She thought about the promise he had made beneath the stars, the howl of the pack rising around them, the certainty she had felt that she would never be alone again. She did not yet know that this quiet, uneasy night was only the beginning. She did not know how many more tears Serafina would shed, how many more times Damien would choose comfort over truth, how many times the promise made beneath the moon would bend and crack, until there was nothing left of it at all. But some small, wolf-born part of her already sensed the storm gathering on the horizon, and for the first time since arriving at Blackthorn territory, Elena Whitmore felt the cold breath of doubt settle over her heart. She closed her eyes, but sleep did not come easily. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a warning whispered in a language only she could hear, and somewhere in the depths of the territory, a soft, satisfied smile curved across Serafina Cole's lips as she watched the lights go dark in the Alpha's window. The days following that night in the garden felt different, though nothing had changed on the surface. Damien still greeted Elena each morning with a kiss to her forehead, still walked with her through the training grounds, still spoke of their future together, with the same warmth he always had. But Elena noticed the small silences now, the moments where his eyes would drift toward the eastern wing of the manor, the way he seemed to hold his breath whenever Serafina's name came up in conversation. Elena told herself she was imagining things. She reminded herself that jealousy could twist even the clearest mind into seeing shadows where there were none. She threw herself into her lessons, determined to prove to the council, and perhaps to herself, that she deserved the title she had been given. Marla noticed the change in her too. "You've been quiet," the old healer said one afternoon, as they ground herbs together in the healing house, the scent of dried lavender filling the air between them. "I'm fine," Elena replied, though her hands moved a little too quickly, crushing the herbs with more force than necessary. Marla set down her mortar and studied Elena with the kind of patience that came from decades of tending to wounds both visible and hidden. "You don't have to tell me, but I've lived in this territory a long time, Elena. I've watched Serafina grow from a child into whatever she is now. And I've watched good, strong wolves lose themselves trying to compete with tears that were never real to begin with." Elena set down her own tools, her chest tightening. "Damien says she's like a sister to him. Perhaps she was, once," Marla said carefully. "But sisters do not weep every time an Alpha's attention shifts elsewhere. Sisters do not appear at his door with gifts 3 times a week. I've said too much already. Just watch, Elena. Watch carefully, and trust what you see with your own eyes, not what you're told to see." The warning settled into Elena's chest like a stone, heavy and impossible to ignore. She spent the following days paying closer attention, and the pattern Marla had described began to reveal itself with painful clarity. Serafina was always present. She arrived at council meetings uninvited, claiming she simply wanted to observe. She lingered near the training grounds when Damien sparred with his warriors, offering praise and gentle encouragement that made his chest puff out with pride. She found reasons to visit his study nearly every evening, always with some small excuse, always leaving just as Elena arrived, as if choreographed to avoid confrontation. Elena decided to speak with Damien directly, choosing an evening when they were alone in their private quarters, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. "I want to talk about Serafina," she began, keeping her voice calm and measured. Damien's shoulders tensed immediately, a reaction that told Elena he had been expecting this conversation and dreading it in equal measure. "Elena, please, not this again." "I haven't said anything yet." "I know what you're going to say," he replied, running a hand through his hair. "You think she's trying to come between us. I've told you, she's had a difficult life. Her mother died when she was young, and I was the only real family she had left after that. I can't just abandon her because it makes you uncomfortable." "I'm not asking you to abandon her," Elena said, keeping her voice steady despite the frustration building in her chest. "I'm asking you to see what I see. She's here every day, Damien. She interrupts our time together constantly. She cries whenever things don't go her way, and somehow it always becomes my fault. That's not fair," Damien said, his voice rising slightly. "Serafina has never once said a bad word about you." "She doesn't need to say it," Elena replied. "She doesn't need words when her tears do all the talking for her." Damien fell silent, his jaw tight, and for a moment, Elena thought he might finally hear her. But then he shook his head, the walls going back up around him. "I think you're letting your insecurity get the better of you. You're new to this territory. You're still finding your place here, and I understand that's difficult. But turning that difficulty into suspicion towards someone who has never harmed you isn't fair to her, or to me." The words landed like a blow, and Elena felt something inside her chest crack quietly, though she refused to let it show on her face. "I'm not insecure, Damien. I'm observant. There's a difference. I need you to trust me," He said, softer now, reaching for her hand. "I made you a promise. I intend to keep it, but I need you to trust my judgment when it comes to the people I've known my entire life." Elena wanted to believe him. She wanted, more than anything, to let the tension between them dissolve, to fall back into the comfortable warmth they had shared in those early weeks. So she nodded, allowing him to pull her close, allowing herself to be soothed by his familiar scent and steady heartbeat, even as the unease in her stomach refused to fully settle. But the pattern did not stop. If anything, it grew worse. A week later, during a formal dinner with visiting dignitaries from the Ashwood territory, Serafina arrived uninvited, dressed in a gown far too elegant for a simple guest, and seated herself at Damien's right hand before Elena could claim her rightful place beside her mate. When Elena approached, Serafina rose immediately, offering the seat with wide, apologetic eyes. "I'm so sorry, Elena. I didn't realize this seat was reserved. Please, take it. I was only keeping it warm for you." The dignitaries watched the exchange with quiet interest, and Elena felt the weight of dozens of eyes evaluating her response. She took the seat with a polite smile, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her rattled, but the message had been delivered clearly to everyone in the room. Serafina belonged close to the alpha. Elena was merely permitted to exist beside him. Throughout the dinner, Serafina inserted herself into every conversation, laughing at Damien's jokes before Elena could respond, finishing his sentences with familiarity that made the visiting dignitaries exchange curious glances. When one of the guests, an older beta from Ashwood, asked directly who the Luna of the territory was, Serafina answered before Elena could open her mouth. "Elena is new to us," she said sweetly, "but I've known Damien since we were children. I suppose you could say I know this territory almost as well as he does." The comment was delivered with such practiced innocence that Elena watched several guests nod approvingly, entirely unaware of the subtle insult woven into the words. Damien, seated between them, said nothing to correct the impression, too absorbed in conversation with another guest to notice the quiet battle unfolding beside him. Later that night, once the guests had departed and the manor had grown quiet, Elena confronted him again, her patience worn thin. "Did you hear what she said tonight? She made it sound as though I don't belong here." "I'm sure she didn't mean it that way," Damien replied, exhaustion evident in his voice. "She gets nervous around large gatherings. Sometimes her words come out wrong." Damien, she sat in my seat. She answered questions that were meant for me. She has been doing this for weeks, and every time I bring it to you, you find a reason to excuse it. Because I don't think it's as serious as you're making it, he said, his voice sharper now. I think you're looking for reasons to be upset with her, and I don't understand why. Elena stared at him, searching his face for any sign of the man who had once promised, with such conviction, that she would never stand alone. I'm not looking for reasons, Damien. I'm telling you what I see happening right in front of us. And I'm telling you that I trust her, he said firmly, his voice leaving no room for further argument. Please, let this go, for my sake, if not for yours. Elena did not respond. She simply turned away, climbing into bed and facing the wall, listening to the sound of Damien's breathing slow beside her, wondering how many more times she would be asked to swallow her own instincts for the sake of someone else's comfort. Over the following weeks, Elena began to withdraw slightly, throwing herself deeper into her duties as future Luna, training with the warriors, assisting Marla in the healing house, sitting in on council meetings, where she offered thoughtful insight that slowly began to win over even the most skeptical elders. She built her own reputation, brick by careful brick, determined that no matter what happened between her and Damien, she would never again be a woman defined solely by a man's promise. But Serafina noticed the growing respect Elena earned, and rather than easing her efforts, she intensified them. It was during a quiet afternoon, as Elena walked alone through the eastern garden, reviewing notes from a council meeting, that Serafina approached her directly for the first time, her expression carefully arranged into something resembling sincerity. Elena, may I speak with you? Elena paused, wary but curious. Of course. I know things have been tense between us, Serafina began, twisting her hands together in a gesture that seemed rehearsed rather than natural. I want you to know that I have never wanted to cause trouble between you and Damien. He means so much to me, as a friend, and I only want him to be happy. If that happiness is with you, then I am truly glad for him. The words sounded sincere enough, and for a brief moment, Elena wondered if she had misjudged the situation entirely. But something in Serafina's eyes, a flicker of calculation quickly masked, told her otherwise. I appreciate you saying that, Elena replied carefully. I hope we can find a way to coexist peacefully. I hope so too, Serafina said, offering a small, trembling smile. It's just difficult, watching someone else take the place I always imagined I might have someday. The confession, delivered so softly, so seemingly by accident, struck Elena with the force of a blade disguised as a whisper. There it was, finally, the truth beneath all the tears and gentle interruptions. Serafina had always believed she belonged beside Damien, and no promise made beneath the stars was going to change that belief. I understand this must be difficult for you, Elena said evenly, refusing to give Serafina the reaction she seemed to be searching for. But Damien chose me. The bond between us cannot be undone by wishing. Serafina's expression flickered, something sharp and cold passing behind her eyes, before the soft mask slid back into place. Of course, she said quietly. I only meant that feelings take time to fade, that's all. Please don't misunderstand me. Elena watched her walk away, the delicate sway of her steps, the practiced grace of a woman who had spent years perfecting the art of seeming harmless. And for the first time, Elena understood with complete clarity that she was not dealing with heartbreak or jealousy alone. She was dealing with a threat wearing the face of innocence, one that Damien refused to see, and one that would not stop until it had taken everything Elena had built. She thought of Marla's warning, of the pattern that had unfolded so precisely over the past weeks, and she made a silent vow to herself as she walked back toward the manor beneath a sky heavy with clouds. She would not be pushed aside quietly. She would not disappear into the shadows simply because Damien was unwilling to see the truth standing directly in front of him. But she had no way of knowing, as she climbed the stone steps back into the halls of Blackthorn territory, that the storm she sensed brewing was about to break far sooner and far more violently than she had ever imagined. The council chamber fell silent the moment Serafina walked through the doors, her steps unsteady, her hands trembling against the fabric of her pale blue dress. Elena, seated near the front beside Marla, felt the shift in the room immediately, a collective intake of breath, a tension that had nothing to do with the trade agreements they had gathered to discuss that morning. "I need to speak," Serafina said, her voice cracking on the words, tears already gathering along her lashes. "I need to speak about something that happened yesterday." Damien rose from his seat at the head of the chamber, concern etched across his features as he moved toward her. "Serafina, what's wrong? What happened?" Elena's stomach twisted with a dread she could not quite explain, though some instinctive part of her already suspected what was coming. "I was walking near the eastern garden yesterday evening," Serafina began, her voice barely above a whisper, as the entire council leaned forward to hear her. "Elena found me there. She told me to stay away from you, Damien. She said that if I didn't stop coming around, she would make sure I regretted it. She was so angry. I've never seen her like that before. I was frightened." Gasps rippled through the chamber, and Elena felt every eye in the room shift toward her, judgment forming before she had even spoken a single word in her own defense. "That's not what happened," Elena said, rising to her feet, her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest. "I did not threaten her. We spoke briefly in the garden, yes, but there was no threat made." "She's lying," Serafina whispered, pressing a trembling hand to her chest as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I would never come here and lie about something like this. I was terrified to even speak up, but I couldn't stay silent any longer." The council members exchanged uneasy glances, and Elena watched in growing horror as sympathy for Serafina's tears spread through the room faster than any argument she could offer. An elder named Corwin, one of the more traditional voices on the council, spoke up first. "Alpha Damien, this is a serious accusation. If the future Luna is threatening pack members, this cannot be ignored." "I did not threaten her," Elena repeated, louder this time, frustration bleeding into her voice. "She approached me, not the other way around. If anyone is going to explain what was actually said, it should be an honest account, not this performance." Serafina flinched dramatically at the word performance, burying her face in her hands, as if the accusation itself had wounded her. "I only wanted to make peace between us. I told her I was sorry for any tension, and she twisted my words into something cruel. I don't understand why she hates me so much." Elena turned to Damien, searching his face for the trust she desperately needed in that moment, the trust he had promised her beneath the stars. Instead, she found conflict, hesitation, a man torn between two women he had known for very different lengths of time, but who both now looked to him for validation. "Damien," Elena said quietly, "you know me. You know I would not threaten anyone without cause." He was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight, his eyes moving between Elena's steady gaze and Serafina's trembling shoulders. When he finally spoke, his words landed like a blade slipping quietly between Elena's ribs. "Elena, I think we need to give this the attention it deserves. Emotions have clearly run high between the two of you. I don't believe you meant real harm, but perhaps some space is needed until we understand what truly happened." The chamber erupted into murmurs, and Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet, felt the careful reputation she had spent months building begin to crumble under the weight of tears she knew were manufactured for exactly this purpose. "You're taking her side," Elena said, her voice quieter now, though no less firm, "without even asking me what was actually said." "I'm not taking anyone's side," Damien replied, though the words rang hollow even as he spoke them. "I'm trying to keep the peace within this council." "Peace," Elena repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. "There was never any threat to keep peace from in the first place, Damien. This is exactly what I warned you about." Marla rose from her seat beside Elena, her voice carrying the authority of decades spent within these very walls. "If I may speak, Alpha Damien, I have known Serafina since she was a child, and I have also come to know Elena well over these past months. I have never once seen Elena act with cruelty toward anyone in this territory. I would ask the council to consider that carefully before drawing conclusions based on tears alone." A few of the older council members nodded thoughtfully at Marla's words, but Corwin was quick to counter, his voice sharp with old suspicion. "With respect, Marla, tears alone are not nothing. Serafina has never given this council reason to doubt her honesty. Elena, however, is still new to our ways. We know little of her true temperament." Elena felt her chest tighten painfully at the implication. The reminder that no matter how hard she worked, no matter how many months she poured into learning and serving this territory, she would always be seen first as an outsider, a Whitmore, someone whose word carried less weight than a childhood friendship built over decades. "I have done nothing but serve this pack faithfully since the day I arrived," Elena said, her voice trembling now, not from fear, but from the effort of holding back the fury rising within her. "I have trained beside your warriors. I have studied beside your healers. I have sat in this very chamber offering counsel that many of you have praised. And now, because one woman's tears fall at a convenient moment, all of that is forgotten?" Silence fell across the chamber, and for a brief, fragile moment, Elena believed her words had finally broken through. But then Serafina let out a soft, broken sob, covering her face once more, and the sympathy in the room shifted back toward her instantly, as if summoned by will alone. "I'm sorry," Serafina whispered through her tears. "I never wanted this to become such a spectacle. I just wanted to protect myself. I didn't mean to cause a divide within the council." Damien moved to her side without hesitation, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, in a gesture of comfort that Elena watched with a growing hollowness in her chest. It was the same gesture he had once reserved only for her, and now it was offered so easily, so instinctively, to another. "We will discuss this further in private," Damien announced to the council, his voice regaining its authority even as his eyes avoided Elena's. "For now, this meeting is adjourned." The council members filed out slowly, murmuring among themselves, casting glances at Elena that ranged from pity to open suspicion. Elena remained standing at her seat, unmoving, as the chamber emptied around her, until only she, Damien, and Serafina remained. "Damien," Elena said, once the doors had closed, her voice low and controlled despite the storm raging inside her. "You cannot possibly believe what she said happened." "I don't know what to believe," he admitted, running a hand through his hair, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. "I only know that I cannot have this kind of tension continuing within my council. It reflects poorly on all of us." "So instead of finding the truth, you would rather silence me to preserve appearances?" "That's not what I said." "It's exactly what you said," Elena replied, her voice rising now, unable to contain the hurt any longer. "You stood there and let her paint me as some kind of threat, without asking a single question about what I actually said to her. Where was the promise you made me, Damien? Where was the protection you swore beneath the stars?" Serafina, still standing quietly nearby, wiped delicately at her eyes and spoke in a soft, wounded voice. "Elena, I truly am sorry if I've caused problems between you. That was never my intention." "Stop," Elena said sharply, turning to face her directly for the first time since the meeting had begun. "Stop pretending you don't know exactly what you're doing. I heard every word you said to me in that garden, and I know precisely what you meant by them. You may have fooled the council today, but you have not fooled me." Serafina's expression flickered, just for a moment, something colder and sharper passing beneath the surface, before the mask of fragility returned. "I don't know what you mean," she said softly, glancing toward Damien as if seeking rescue. "Damien, she's frightening me again." "Elena," Damien said warningly, stepping between them, "that's enough." Elena stared at him, at the man who had once promised the entire pack that she would never stand alone, now standing protectively in front of another woman, while Elena's own truth went unheard. Something inside her, some quiet ember of hope she had been nursing since that first night beneath the stars, flickered and dimmed. "You asked me to trust your judgment," Elena said quietly, her voice steady, despite the ache spreading through her chest. "I did. I trusted you completely. But I am beginning to understand that trust was never going to be enough to protect me here." She turned and walked out of the chamber without waiting for a response, her footsteps echoing down the stone corridor, each one carrying her further from the promise that had once felt so unbreakable. Behind her, she heard Serafina's soft, satisfied exhale, and Damien's low voice, offering comfort to the woman who had just orchestrated Elena's public humiliation with nothing more than a few well-timed tears. That night, Elena sat alone in the eastern tower, staring out over the moonlit territory she had come to think of as home. and for the first time since arriving at Blackthorn Land, she allowed herself to fully acknowledge what she had been trying so hard to deny. Damien's love for her was real. She believed that much. But his loyalty, when tested against years of familiar comfort, had proven far more fragile than any promise made beneath a sky full of stars. She thought of her grandmother, of the quiet strength that had carried their broken bloodline through generations of exile and hardship. She thought of every lesson she had learned since arriving here, every scar she had earned proving her worth to a pack that had never fully accepted her to begin with. And somewhere deep within her chest, beneath the hurt and the anger and the exhaustion of constantly fighting to be believed, a new resolve began to take root, quiet but unshakable, like the first cold breath of winter settling over the land. She would not disappear quietly. She would not let herself be erased by tears, designed to manipulate a room full of people too eager to believe the easier story. Whatever came next, whatever battles still waited for her within these walls, Elena Whitmore intended to face them with her head held high, no matter how many promises had already begun to crack beneath the weight of Seraphina Cole's careful, calculated performance. News of the council meeting spread through Blackthorn territory within hours, twisting and reshaping itself with every retelling, until Elena barely recognized the story being whispered in the halls. By the time she walked through the training grounds the following morning, she could feel the weight of dozens of eyes following her, some curious, some sympathetic, and far too many filled with the same suspicion Corwin had voiced so openly in the council chamber. She held her chin high and continued her routine as though nothing had changed, sparring with the younger warriors, reviewing supply reports with the quartermaster, checking in on Marla at the healing house. She refused to give the pack the satisfaction of watching her crumble. But privately, the cracks were beginning to show. Damien had not sought her out since the meeting, choosing instead to bury himself in matters of territory business, and when their paths did cross in the manor's hallways, his greetings were brief, distracted, laced with a guilt he seemed unwilling to fully confront. Elena told herself she understood, that leadership required difficult decisions, that perhaps he needed time to sort through the tangled loyalty pulling him in two directions, but understanding did little to ease the loneliness settling into her chest. It was Marla who finally brought her the piece of information that would change everything. "I need to show you something," the healer said one afternoon, pulling Elena aside into a quiet alcove away from prying ears. Her expression was grave, her voice hushed with the seriousness of someone carrying a dangerous secret. "Do you remember when Seraphina claimed, years ago, that she was attacked by a rogue wolf near the northern border?" Elena frowned, searching her memory. She had heard the story mentioned in passing, always spoken of with hushed sympathy, another chapter in the tragic narrative that seemed to follow Seraphina everywhere she went. "I've heard of it, yes. Wasn't that when Damien first took her under his protection?" "That's exactly when it happened," Marla confirmed. "It was the turning point that cemented her place within this pack, the moment Damien decided he would always look out for her, no matter what. Everyone believed her story completely. There was never any reason to question it." "But you're questioning it now," Elena said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. Marla nodded, glancing around the alcove once more before continuing. "I was young then, still training under the previous healer, but I remember treating her wounds myself. At the time, I accepted what everyone accepted, that she had been attacked. But recently, going through old records for an unrelated matter, I found something troubling. The wounds I treated that day were not consistent with an animal attack, Elena. They were shallow, precise, almost as if they had been made deliberately." Elena felt a chill move through her, the pieces of a much larger picture beginning to align in her mind. "You think she injured herself?" "I cannot say for certain," Marla admitted. "It was years ago, and memory can be an unreliable thing. But I have spent the past few days searching through old healing records, comparing notes I took at the time against what I remember of genuine attack wounds I've treated over the years. The pattern does not match. If I am right, Elena, then Seraphina fabricated that entire story to gain Damien's sympathy and protection, and it worked exactly as she intended it to." Elena's mind raced, connecting threads that had felt disconnected until now. The years of careful positioning, the tears that appeared and vanished with perfect timing, the council meeting where a fabricated threat had turned an entire room against her within minutes. If Serafina had been willing to injure herself as a child to secure Damien's devotion, there was no limit to what she might be capable of now, as an adult with far more at stake. "I need to bring this to Damien," Elena said, though even as she spoke the words, doubt crept into her voice. Would he even listen this time? "Be careful how you approach it," Marla warned. "This is not proof, only suspicion built on old memory and incomplete records. If you accuse her outright without solid evidence, you risk giving her exactly the kind of victimhood she thrives on." Elena spent that evening gathering her thoughts, choosing her words with painstaking care, before finally approaching Damien in his study, where he sat reviewing territory maps by candlelight, the tension of recent weeks etched permanently into the lines of his face. "I need to speak with you," she said quietly, closing the door behind her. Damien looked up, and for a moment, Elena saw a flicker of the warmth that had once existed so easily between them. "Of course, what is it?" She explained carefully, laying out Marla's findings without accusation, presenting the information as a possibility worth investigating, rather than a certainty carved in stone. She watched his expression shift from curiosity to confusion, and finally, to something closer to anger, though she quickly realized the anger was not directed at Serafina. "You're suggesting Marla misremembers wounds from over a decade ago, and based on that uncertain memory, you want me to believe Serafina fabricated an attack that nearly cost her life?" His voice carried a sharp edge of disbelief. "Elena, do you hear yourself?" "I'm not asking you to believe anything with certainty," Elena replied, keeping her voice level despite the frustration building within her. "I'm asking you to consider the possibility, to look into it properly, the same way you would investigate any other serious claim within this territory." "This isn't investigation, Elena. This is you, trying to tear down the reputation of a woman who has already been through enough pain in her life, simply because you feel threatened by her presence in mine." The accusation struck deep, and Elena felt something within her harden in response, a protective wall rising against words that cut far too close to the same dismissive tone she had heard from him in the council chamber. "I am not trying to tear anyone down, Damien. I am trying to protect myself from someone who has spent months manipulating every situation to her advantage, while you refuse to see it. And I am trying to protect someone I have cared for since childhood, from baseless accusations built on nothing but suspicion and old, unreliable memories." His voice rose now, frustration bleeding into every word. "I understand that the two of you have not gotten along, but this has gone too far. I will not stand here and let you accuse her of fabricating an attack that left real scars." "Have you ever actually looked at those scars closely, Damien? Has anyone besides Marla, all those years ago?" "Enough," he snapped, standing abruptly from his desk, the candlelight flickering across features drawn tight with anger. "I will not have this conversation again. Serafina has done nothing to deserve this treatment, and I am disappointed that you would bring me such a serious accusation based on so little proof." Elena stood her ground, though her chest ached with the familiar sting of being disbelieved once again. "I brought this to you honestly, Damien, because I trusted that you would want the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. I see now that I was wrong to expect that. That's not fair. Isn't it?" Elena's voice trembled slightly, though she refused to let it break entirely. "Every time I bring you evidence, every time I try to show you what I see so clearly, you find a reason to dismiss it. You call it jealousy, insecurity, baseless suspicion. But I have never once given you reason to doubt my honesty, Damien, and yet you extend endless grace to her, while offering me none." Damien's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, the silence between them stretching long and painful. "I love you," Elena continued softly, the words carrying more weight than she had intended them to. "But I am beginning to wonder if that love is enough to survive this, if you continue to choose comfort over truth every single time." "I am not choosing her over you," Damien said finally, his voice quieter now, though the certainty from moments before had begun to waver. "I am simply asking for proof before I destroy someone's reputation and standing within this pack." "And what proof would satisfy you?" Elena asked. "Because every time I bring you something, it is never enough." He did not answer, and Elena took his silence as the answer she needed. She turned and left the study without another word, her footsteps echoing down the empty corridor, each one carrying her further from the man who had once promised, with such absolute certainty, that she would never stand alone. That night, sleep refused to come. Elena lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the room she now occupied alone, having chosen to retreat to a separate chamber, rather than share a bed with a man who could not offer her the trust she so desperately needed. She thought of her grandmother's stories about the strength required to survive as a Whitmore, of the resilience woven into her bloodline despite generations of hardship and dismissal. She thought, too, of Serafina's careful smile, the practiced tears, the calculated positioning that had slowly, methodically, begun to unravel everything Elena had worked so hard to build within this territory. Somewhere in the depths of the manor, she knew Serafina was likely sleeping soundly, secure in the knowledge that her performance had once again succeeded in turning Damien's judgment against the very woman he had sworn to protect. Elena closed her eyes, exhaustion finally pulling her toward an uneasy sleep, but even in her dreams, she could not escape the growing certainty that the true confrontation, the one that would determine everything, was still waiting for her, closer than she realized, and far more devastating than anything she had yet endured. The great hall had never felt so crowded, nor so cold, as it did on the night of the harvest gathering. Every family within Blackthorn territory had come together beneath strings of lantern light to celebrate the season's bounty, long tables filled with food, laughter rising warm and easy through the air. Elena stood near the head table beside Damien, forcing a smile she did not feel, the events of recent weeks still sitting heavy in her chest. She had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that the celebration might offer a moment of peace, a chance to remind herself why she had fallen in love with this territory and its people in the first place. She watched children chasing each other between the tables, watched elders sharing stories over cups of warm cider, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to relax. That peace shattered the instant Serafina entered the hall. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, greeting pack members with soft smiles and gentle words, until she reached the head table where Damien stood. Elena watched her approach with a wariness that had become second nature over the past weeks, bracing herself for whatever performance was about to unfold. "Damien, might I speak with you privately for a moment?" Serafina asked, her voice carrying just enough concern to draw the attention of nearby guests. Damien glanced at Elena, hesitation flickering across his features, before he nodded, and followed Serafina toward a quieter corner of the hall. Elena remained standing near the head table, watching from a distance, her instincts screaming that something was about to happen. She did not have to wait long. Moments later, a commotion rippled through the crowd as Serafina's voice rose in distress, sharp enough to cut through the surrounding chatter. Elena moved quickly toward the sound, arriving just in time to see Serafina stumbling backward, one hand pressed dramatically against her cheek, tears already streaming down her face. "She struck me," Serafina cried out, her voice trembling as she pointed a shaking finger toward Elena. "Elena struck me. I only wanted to speak with Damien, and she came at me out of nowhere." The hall fell into stunned silence, every eye turning toward Elena, who stood frozen in disbelief at the audacity of the accusation. She had not moved from the head table until this very moment. Dozens of witnesses had watched her standing there, yet the sheer confidence of Serafina's claim seemed to sweep logic aside entirely. "That is not true," Elena said, her voice cutting through the murmurs rippling across the hall. "I have been standing at the head table this entire time. Ask anyone who was near me." "I saw what I saw," Serafina sobbed, clutching her cheek, as though genuinely injured, though Elena could see no mark, no bruise, nothing to substantiate the claim beyond the performance itself. "Why would I lie about something like this?" Damien moved quickly to Serafina's side, his expression a mixture of shock and confusion as he examined her face for any sign of injury. Elena watched him search for proof of the assault, watched the crowd hold its collective breath, waiting to see how their alpha would respond. "There's no mark," Marla's voice rang out from somewhere near the back of the crowd, the healer pushing her way forward with the same quiet authority she carried in every situation. "I have examined countless injuries in my years as this pack's healer. If Elena had truly struck her with any real force, there would be visible evidence. There is none. Serafina's sobs faltered for just a moment, a flicker of something colder passing behind her tear-filled eyes before she recovered, pressing her hand more firmly against her cheek. Perhaps it hasn't bruised yet. Perhaps the pain simply hasn't shown itself fully. Are you calling me a liar, Marla? I am simply stating what I observe as this territory's healer, Marla replied evenly, refusing to be drawn into an emotional confrontation. Dozens of witnesses can confirm Elena never left the head table tonight. A murmur of agreement rippled through several nearby guests, and for a moment, Elena felt a flicker of hope that the truth might finally break through. But Damien, still standing close to Serafina, seemed unable to fully release his concern for her, his loyalty pulled taut between years of familiar devotion and the mounting evidence standing plainly before him. Perhaps there was some misunderstanding, he said slowly, his voice carrying across the hall with the weight of authority the entire pack had come to expect from him. Regardless of what occurred, I think it best if Elena steps back from her Luna duties temporarily, until this matter can be properly investigated. This is for the sake of peace within our territory. The words landed like a physical blow, and Elena felt the entire hall tilt around her, dozens of eyes now shifting between pity and open judgment. She had not struck anyone. Witnesses had confirmed as much. And yet here she stood, condemned before an investigation had even truly begun, stripped of her title in front of the very pack she had spent months earning the trust of. Damien, she said quietly, her voice trembling not with fear, but with a fury she was struggling desperately to contain. You cannot be serious. I am trying to keep the peace, he replied, though he would not meet her eyes as he spoke the words. Please, Elena, just for now, until we sort this out properly. There is nothing to sort out, Elena said, her voice growing steadier despite the devastation building within her chest. I did not touch her. Multiple witnesses have already confirmed I never left this spot, and yet you are choosing, once again, to believe her tears over the truth standing plainly in front of you. Serafina, sensing the tide beginning to shift dangerously toward exposure, let out another soft, wounded sob, burying her face in her hands, as if the confrontation itself were too much to bear. I never wanted any of this. I only came to celebrate the harvest with everyone. I don't understand why she hates me so much that she would do this. Elena turned to face her directly, ignoring the murmurs rippling through the crowd around them. Enough, she said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that silenced even the whispers nearby. Enough of the tears that appear exactly when they are needed and vanish the moment they've served their purpose. Enough of the careful positioning, the manufactured victimhood, the endless performance that this entire pack has been fooled by for years. Gasps rippled through the crowd at Elena's sudden boldness, but she continued, unwilling to be silenced any longer. I have watched you insert yourself into every moment between Damien and I since the day I arrived here. I have watched you cry on command, watched you twist innocent conversations into accusations, watched you claim credit for concern you have never truly felt. And tonight, in front of this entire territory, you stood in a crowded hall and accused me of an assault that dozens of witnesses know never happened. That's not fair, Serafina whispered, though her voice had lost some of its earlier tremor, a hint of something sharper bleeding through the practiced fragility. Fair would have been believing me the first time I raised concerns, Elena replied, her voice steady despite the ache spreading through her chest. Fair would have been an investigation before condemnation, but I have learned, over these past months, that fairness is not something extended to me within these walls, no matter how much I earn it. She turned to Damien then, meeting his gaze directly, refusing to look away despite the storm of emotion visible in his eyes. You promised me, in front of this entire pack, that I would never stand alone. Tonight, you have condemned me without evidence, stripped me of my title, in front of everyone I have worked to earn respect from. All because one woman's tears carry more weight in your eyes than months of honest devotion from me. Elena, Damien began, his voice strained. Please understand, I am trying to... I understand perfectly, she interrupted, her voice quiet now, though every word carried the weight of a decision forming somewhere deep within her. I understand that promises made beneath the stars mean very little when tested against years of comfortable loyalty, built long before I ever arrived. She did not wait for his response. She turned and walked from the hall, her footsteps steady, despite the devastation threatening to consume her, past rows of watching faces, past the flickering lanterns and abandoned plates of celebration food, out into the cold night air where the moon hung heavy and silent above the tree line. Behind her, she heard the hall erupt into murmurs once more, heard Seraphina's soft, satisfied exhale carried faintly on the breeze, heard Damien's voice calling her name, though he did not follow. Elena walked until the sounds of the celebration faded entirely behind her, until only the whisper of wind through autumn leaves remained, and there, beneath the vast and indifferent sky, she finally allowed the tears she had been holding back all evening to fall freely down her face. She had given everything to this territory, to this pack, to the promise a man had made her beneath these very stars, and in a single evening, built on nothing more than practiced tears and years of comfortable loyalty, all of it had been stripped away in front of everyone who mattered. Somewhere behind her, in the warmth of the great hall, Seraphina Cole would be accepting comfort and sympathy from a pack that had chosen, once again, to believe the easier story. And Elena, standing alone beneath the cold autumn sky, finally understood with painful clarity that no amount of truth would ever be enough to compete with tears delivered at precisely the right moment. The realization settled into her chest like a stone, heavy and unshakable, and for the first time since arriving at Blackthorn territory, Elena began to seriously consider a question she had never allowed herself to ask before. What if the promise had been broken long before tonight, and she was only now finally seeing it clearly? 3 days passed before Elena returned to the manor, 3 days spent in the small cottage near the healing house that Marla had quietly offered without judgment or question. She had needed the distance, needed space to breathe without the weight of watching eyes following her through every hallway, without the constant reminder of a title stripped away in front of an entire territory. When she finally returned, she found the manor humming with an unfamiliar tension, servants speaking in hushed voices, warriors casting uneasy glances as she passed. She made her way toward Damien's study, prepared to face whatever conversation awaited her, only to find the door already open, voices drifting out into the corridor. "You cannot keep avoiding this decision forever," Corwin's voice carried through the doorway, sharp with the particular urgency of a man used to being obeyed. "The council needs clarity. Is Elena to be reinstated or not? The pack grows restless with uncertainty." "I don't know," Damien's voice replied, exhausted and frayed at the edges, in a way Elena had never heard before. "I don't know what to believe anymore." Elena stepped into the doorway before she could stop herself, and both men turned toward her, surprise flickering across their faces. Corwin recovered first, offering a stiff nod before excusing himself, leaving Elena and Damien alone in the study for the first time since the harvest gathering. "You're back," Damien said quietly, rising from his desk. "I never left the territory," Elena replied evenly. "I simply needed space from a place that no longer felt safe for me." Guilt flickered across his features, though he said nothing to acknowledge it directly. "The council has been pressing me for a decision regarding your position." "And what have you decided?" Elena asked, though something in her voice suggested she already suspected the answer would disappoint her once again. "I need more time," he admitted. "The accusation at the harvest gathering, combined with everything else that's happened, has created real division within the council. Some believe you, others don't. I cannot simply reinstate you without addressing their concerns properly." Elena studied him for a long moment, searching his face for some remnant of the man who had once carried her through these very halls, who had promised the entire pack that she would never stand alone. She found only exhaustion, uncertainty, and a guilt he seemed unwilling to fully confront. "Do you believe me, Damien?" she asked finally, her voice quiet but steady. "Not the council, not the pack. You. Do you believe that I never touched her that night?" He hesitated, and that hesitation told Elena everything she needed to know, more clearly than any words could have. "I want to believe you," he said finally, the admission clearly paining him. "But I also cannot simply dismiss what Seraphina claims to have experienced. I am caught between two people I care about deeply, Elena, and I don't know how to navigate that fairly. There is no fair path when one side is lying, Elena replied, her voice carrying a weariness that had settled deep into her bones over the past weeks. I have given you evidence, Damien. I have given you witnesses. I have given you months of honest devotion to this pack, and to you. And still, you cannot say with certainty that you believe me over her. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple, Elena said, her voice rising slightly before she forced it back under control. Either you trust me, or you don't. Either the promise you made me beneath the stars still means something, or it was simply words spoken in a moment of certainty that has long since faded. Damien ran a hand through his hair, frustration and exhaustion warring visibly across his features. I don't know how to fix this, Elena. I don't know how to make everyone happy. You don't need to make everyone happy, Elena replied softly. You only needed to choose truth over comfort, and you have failed to do that at every single turn. The words hung heavy in the air between them, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Elena watched him, waiting for something, some sign that the man she had fallen in love with beneath these stars still existed somewhere beneath the weight of divided loyalty and political pressure. But he said nothing further, offered no reassurance, no renewed promise, only silence that stretched longer and colder with each passing second. I understand now, Elena said finally, her voice carrying a quiet resolve that had been building within her since the night of the harvest gathering. I understand that no matter how much truth I bring you, no matter how much evidence stands plainly before you, there will always be a part of you that chooses her comfort over my honesty. I cannot continue living within a bond built on that kind of uncertainty. Elena, please, Damien said, alarm finally breaking through the exhaustion in his voice. Don't say things you don't mean. I mean every word, she replied, and for the first time in weeks, her voice carried no tremor, no hesitation, only a steady clarity that surprised even herself. I came to this territory with nothing, Damien. I built a place for myself here through honest work and genuine devotion. I will not continue to watch that work be dismantled by tears that arrive precisely when they are needed most, while the man who promised to protect me stands paralyzed by loyalty to someone who has spent years manipulating that very loyalty. She turned to leave, but Damien's voice stopped her at the doorway. What are you going to do? Elena paused, considering the question carefully before answering. I don't know yet, but I know I cannot continue as I have been, waiting for a promise to be honored that seems less real with every passing day. She left the study without waiting for a response, making her way through the quiet corridors of the manor toward the eastern tower, where she had spent so many nights recently staring out over the territory she had once believed would become her permanent home. The autumn air had turned sharp and cold, carrying the first hints of the coming winter, and Elena wrapped her arms around herself as she gazed out over the moonlit land. She thought of everything she had sacrificed to build a life here, every lesson learned, every scar earned proving her worth to a pack that had never fully embraced her. She thought of Marla's quiet kindness, of the small handful of pack members who had come to genuinely respect her over these past months, and she thought of Damien, of the promise he had made beneath these very stars, a promise that had crumbled so completely under the weight of practiced tears and years of comfortable loyalty. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, and she turned to find Marla standing in the doorway, concern etched across her weathered features. I heard about your conversation with Damien, the healer said gently, stepping into the room. The whole manor is talking about it. Of course they are, Elena replied with a tired smile. Nothing stays quiet within these walls for long. Marla moved to stand beside her at the window, silent for a long moment before speaking again. What will you do, Elena? Elena considered the question seriously this time, turning it over in her mind with the same careful deliberation she brought to every decision since arriving at Blackthorn territory. I don't know yet, she admitted, but I know I cannot continue living in the shadow of a promise that no longer feels honored. I have given everything I have to this place, to him, and it has never been enough to outweigh her tears. You have built something real here, Marla said softly. Something that exists independent of Damien, if you choose to see it that way. You are respected by this pack, Elena, more than you realize, not because of who you are bonded to, but because of who you have proven yourself to be. Elena turned to look at her, surprised by the unexpected comfort in the healer's words. You believe that? I know that, Marla replied firmly. I have watched you these past months, Elena. I have watched you earn the trust of warriors who once doubted a Whitmore could hold any real strength. I have watched you sit in council meetings and offer wisdom that elders twice your age respected. Whatever happens between you and Damien, that respect does not disappear. You built it yourself, through your own strength, not through any promise made beneath the stars. The words settled into Elena's chest like a small, steady flame, warming something that had grown cold over the past difficult weeks. She thought of the strength woven into her bloodline, the resilience her grandmother had taught her, the quiet determination that had carried her through every hardship long before Damien Voss had ever entered her life. Thank you, Marla, she said quietly, for everything. For your friendship, your honesty, your willingness to stand beside me, even when it would have been easier not to. Marla squeezed her hand gently. Whatever you decide, Elena, know that you do not walk this path alone, no matter what happens with the Alpha's promise. Elena nodded, gratitude swelling in her chest even as uncertainty continued to churn beneath the surface. She did not yet know what her next step would be, did not yet know whether she had the strength to walk away from everything she had built here, or whether some small, stubborn part of her still hoped Damien might finally choose truth over comfort. But as she stood in the eastern tower that night, watching the moon rise slowly over the territory she had once believed would become her forever home, Elena felt the first true stirrings of a decision beginning to take shape within her, one that would change everything she had known since the night a gray wolf had saved her life in the forest and called her his fated mate beneath a sky full of promises that had, one by one, begun to fall like autumn leaves around her feet. Sleep had become a stranger to Elena over the past week, her nights filled with restless thoughts that circled endlessly through every promise broken, every accusation left unanswered, every moment Damien had chosen hesitation over conviction. She sat now in the small cottage near the healing house, a cup of untouched tea growing cold on the table before her, watching the fire crackle in the hearth, as she allowed herself, finally, to think clearly about everything that had happened since the night she first arrived at Blackthorn territory. She thought back to the woman she had been before Damien found her in that forest, running for her life, believing she would die alone and forgotten among the trees. That woman had been desperate for belonging, so hungry for a place in the world that she had accepted every promise offered to her without question, grateful simply to be wanted. But the woman sitting in this cottage now was different. Months of training, of council meetings, of proving herself again and again to a skeptical pack, had built something within her that had not existed before. A quiet strength, a clarity of purpose, a refusal to accept less than what she deserved, simply because gratitude told her she should feel lucky for whatever scraps of loyalty were offered. She thought of every warning sign she had ignored in those early weeks, choosing comfort over instinct, choosing the easy path of trust over the harder path of vigilance. She thought of Serafina's careful positioning, her practiced tears, the years of patient manipulation that had clearly been building toward exactly this moment, and she thought of Damien, caught so completely between old loyalty and new love that he had proven incapable of choosing truth, even when it stood plainly before him. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts, and she opened it to find Marla standing there, a woven basket in her hands. "I brought supplies," the healer said, stepping inside and setting the basket on the table. "Bread, dried herbs, a bit of honey. I thought you might need them, given how little you've been eating this past week." Elena managed a small, grateful smile. "You worry too much about me." "Someone has to," Marla replied, settling into the chair across from her, "especially when the person responsible for your well-being seems incapable of doing so himself." Elena said nothing, staring into the fire as the weight of the healer's words settled over her. "You've been quiet these past few days," Marla continued gently. "Quieter than I've ever seen you, even during the worst of everything with Serafina. What's on your mind, Elena?" Elena was silent for a long moment, gathering her thoughts before finally speaking. "I keep asking myself the same question, over and over. When did loving him stop being enough to justify staying?" Marla's expression softened with understanding. "And what answer have you found?" "I think," Elena said slowly, testing the words as she spoke them for the first time, I think the answer arrived the moment I realized I was losing myself, trying to prove my innocence to someone who should have believed me without question in the first place. The admission hung heavy in the small cottage, and Elena felt something shift within her chest as she spoke it aloud, a weight lifting even as a new kind of grief settled in to take its place. I have spent months defending myself, she continued, explaining, justifying, offering evidence, trying so desperately to be believed. And every single time, no matter how much proof I brought forward, it was never quite enough to outweigh her tears. I am tired, Marla, tired in a way that sleep cannot fix. That is a heavy realization to carry, Marla said softly. It is, Elena agreed. But it is also, strangely, a relief. Because for the first time since arriving here, I finally understand that this exhaustion was never going to end on its own. Serafina will always find new tears to shed. Damien will always find new reasons to hesitate. And I will always be the one left standing alone, trying to prove a truth that should never have required proof in the first place. Marla reached across the table and took Elena's hand, her weathered fingers warm and steady. What will you do? Elena took a deep breath, feeling the decision she had been circling for days finally settle into something solid and certain within her. I think I need to walk away, Marla. Not because I have stopped loving him, but because loving him has cost me more of myself than I am willing to keep paying. That is not an easy path, Marla said gently. Leaving a bonded mate, even one who has failed you, carries its own kind of pain. The bond does not simply disappear because you wish it to. I know, Elena replied. But staying carries a different kind of pain, one that erodes a little more of who I am with each passing day. I would rather face the pain of leaving with my dignity intact than continue losing pieces of myself while waiting for a promise that may never be honored. Marla studied her for a long moment, something like pride flickering across her weathered features. You have grown, Elena, since the day you first arrived at this territory. I remember the frightened young woman who stumbled into these halls, grateful simply to be alive. The woman sitting before me now is someone entirely different, someone who has found her own strength independent of anyone else's protection. I have you to thank for much of that, Elena said softly. Your guidance, your honesty, your willingness to see the truth even when others refuse to. You did the work yourself, Marla replied firmly. I only offered what small support I could along the way. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling softly as Elena allowed herself to fully sit with the decision she had made. It did not feel easy, it did not feel painless, but it felt, for the first time in weeks, like something clear and unshakable, a path forward that belonged entirely to her. Have you thought about where you might go? Marla asked eventually. Elena nodded slowly. My grandmother left behind old family lands to the south, territory that has sat empty and unclaimed since our bloodline was scattered generations ago. I have thought, sometimes, about what it might mean to reclaim that place, to build something of my own, rather than continuing to fight for recognition within a place that has never fully accepted me. That is a bold undertaking, Marla said, though her tone carried more admiration than doubt. Reclaiming abandoned packlands, rebuilding a broken bloodline's territory from nothing, it would not be an easy road. No, Elena agreed, but I think, perhaps, it is exactly the kind of challenge I need. Something that belongs entirely to me, built by my own strength rather than granted through anyone else's promise. Marla squeezed her hand once more before rising from her chair. Whatever you decide, Elena, know that you carry the respect of many within this territory, myself included. That respect will not disappear simply because you choose to walk a different path. After Marla left, Elena remained by the fire long into the night, turning the decision over in her mind again and again, testing it for cracks, searching for any lingering doubt that might suggest she was moving too quickly, too rashly. But each time she examined it, the decision held firm, steady and certain, in a way few things had felt certain since arriving at Blackthorn territory. She thought of the promise Damien had made beneath the stars, the howl of the pack rising around them, the certainty she had once felt that she would never stand alone again. She understood now that promises, no matter how sincerely spoken, meant little without the daily choice to honor them, without the willingness to choose truth over comfort when comfort proved easier. Damien had made his choice, again and again. Each time he hesitated, each time he extended grace to Serafina that he withheld from Elena, each time he chose the peace of the council over the truth standing plainly before him. And now, Elena understood. It was her turn to make a choice of her own. She would not wait any longer for a promise to be honored that had already broken so many times before. She would not continue sacrificing pieces of herself in the hope that eventually, somehow, it might finally be enough. The fire burned low as the night deepened, and Elena sat watching the embers glow, feeling something settle within her that felt remarkably like peace, quiet and unshakable, the first true peace she had felt in weeks. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of letting go. Tomorrow, she would take the first step toward reclaiming a life built on her own strength, rather than someone else's fading promise. Tonight, she allowed herself simply to grieve what had been lost, and to feel grateful for the clarity that had finally, painfully, emerged from the wreckage of a bond that had once felt unbreakable beneath a sky full of stars. Damien found her in the eastern garden the following morning, standing near the very hedge where Serafina's manipulation had first fully revealed itself weeks earlier. Elena had chosen the location deliberately, wanting the conversation that was about to unfold to happen in the place where so much had first begun to unravel. "You wanted to speak with me," Damien said, approaching cautiously, uncertainty evident in every line of his posture. "I did," Elena replied, her voice calm and steady, despite the weight of what she was about to say. "I need you to listen, Damien, without interrupting, without defending, without explaining away what I am about to tell you." He nodded slowly, something in her tone clearly signaling that this conversation carried a different weight than any that had come before it. "I have spent months trying to earn your trust," Elena began, "trying to prove, again and again, that my word carries as much weight as hers does. I have offered evidence. I have offered witnesses. I have offered nothing but honesty since the day I arrived in this territory. And every single time, it has never quite been enough." "Elena, you promised not to interrupt," she said gently, and he fell silent, jaw tight, eyes fixed on her with an intensity that suggested he already sensed what was coming. "I release myself," Elena continued, her voice carrying a quiet strength that surprised even her. "From the promise you made me beneath the stars. Not because I have stopped caring for you, Damien, but because a Luna who is not trusted by her own alpha is no Luna at all. I cannot continue standing in a position of leadership within a pack where my honesty is questioned at every turn, where tears calculated for maximum effect carry more weight than months of proven devotion." Damien's expression shifted through disbelief, alarm, and finally something closer to desperation. "You cannot mean this. Elena, please, we can work through this." "We have been trying to work through this for weeks," Elena replied evenly, "and every attempt has ended the same way, with you caught between loyalty to her and loyalty to me, unable to choose, unwilling to fully commit to either. I cannot continue living in that uncertainty, Damien. I deserve better than being perpetually unsure of where I stand." "I do trust you," he said, his voice cracking slightly with the strain of the moment. "I know that now. I have known it for days, if I am honest with myself. I was simply too afraid of the consequences of admitting Serafina had deceived me for so long." Elena studied him for a long moment, searching for sincerity beneath the desperation in his voice. She believed him, in a way. She believed that some part of him truly did trust her, truly did regret the hesitation that had cost them both so much. But belief alone was not enough anymore. "I appreciate you saying that," she said softly. "But it comes too late, Damien. Not because I do not believe your regret is genuine, but because trust cannot simply be restored through words spoken after the damage has already been done. You had months of opportunities to choose truth over comfort, and each time, you chose comfort. I cannot build a future on the hope that this time, finally, will be different." "What are you saying exactly?" His voice had grown quiet now, the desperation replaced by something closer to resignation. "I am saying that I am leaving Blackthorn territory," Elena said, the words finally spoken aloud carrying a strange mixture of grief and liberation. "I am reclaiming my family's lands to the south, lands that have sat empty since my bloodline was scattered generations ago. I intend to rebuild something there, something that belongs entirely to me, built through my own strength, rather than granted through anyone else's promise. Damien was silent for a long moment, the weight of her words settling over him visibly. "The mark," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "What happens to the mark between us?" Elena reached up instinctively to touch the place on her shoulder, where his mark still remained, a physical reminder of a bond that could not simply be erased through choice alone. "The mark will remain," she said quietly. "The bond itself cannot be undone. Not fully. Not by either of us. But I have already completed the acknowledgement release, the ritual that removes the bond's claim over my choices, my leadership, my future. It was not easy, and it was not painless. But it is done." Shock registered clearly on Damien's face. The acknowledgement release was rare, painful, spoken of in hushed tones among the pack's oldest members, as a ritual reserved for only the most desperate circumstances. That Elena had already completed it, alone, without seeking his counsel or permission, spoke to a resolve he had clearly not anticipated. "You did this without telling me," he said, though there was no anger in his voice, only a kind of stunned realization. "I did it because it was mine to decide," Elena replied, "just as staying or leaving was always mine to decide, no matter how much the pack, the council, or even you might have wished otherwise." "Elena, please," Damien said, stepping closer, desperation returning to his voice. "Give me another chance. I know I have failed you. I know I chose comfort when I should have chosen truth. But I am asking you, please, do not walk away from what we built together." Elena felt the weight of his plea settle into her chest, felt the old familiar pull of the bond still linking them together despite everything that had happened. Part of her wanted, desperately, to believe that this moment of clarity might finally be enough to change things permanently. But she had believed that before too many times, only to watch the same pattern repeat itself again and again. "I am not walking away because I have stopped caring, Damien," she said softly. "I am walking away because I have finally learned to care for myself as much as I have cared for you. I spent so long believing that love meant enduring whatever pain was necessary to keep a promise alive. I understand now that real love, the kind worth building a life around, does not require constant sacrifice of one's own dignity to survive." "What about Serafina?" he asked quietly. "What happens to her, if you leave?" "That is no longer my concern," Elena replied, though there was no bitterness in her voice, only a tired kind of finality. "You will need to decide, on your own, whether you are willing to finally see her clearly, without the years of comfortable loyalty clouding your judgment. That decision belongs entirely to you now, Damien, just as my decision to leave belongs entirely to me." He said nothing further, the silence between them stretching long and heavy, filled with everything left unsaid, every promise that had once felt so certain, now scattered like autumn leaves across the garden floor. "I am sorry," Damien said finally, his voice barely audible. "I am sorry I failed to protect you the way I promised I would." Elena nodded slowly, feeling the finality of the moment settle over her like a quiet blanket of resolve. "I forgive you," she said softly, and she meant it, though forgiveness did not erase the decision she had already made. But forgiveness does not mean staying, Damien. It simply means I no longer wish to carry the weight of anger toward you, as I build whatever comes next for me. She turned to leave the garden, her steps steady, despite the grief threading through her chest, and Damien did not follow, standing frozen among the hedges where their story had first begun to unravel so many weeks ago. Behind her, she heard nothing but silence, the kind of silence that spoke louder than any protest ever could have. As Elena walked back toward the manor to begin gathering her belongings, she felt something shift within her, a quiet, unshakable sense of clarity settling over her chest. She had spent months fighting to prove her worth to a pack that had never fully embraced her, to an alpha who had struggled to choose truth over comfortable loyalty. She would spend her strength differently now, building something entirely her own, on land that belonged to her bloodline, defined by her own choices rather than anyone else's fading promises. She did not look back as she crossed the courtyard toward the manor, the autumn wind carrying the scent of the coming winter through the trees, and for the first time in weeks, Elena Whitmore felt something close to genuine peace settle over her. the quiet certainty of a woman who had finally chosen herself. Word of Elena's departure spread through Blackthorn territory with the same speed that had once carried news of her arrival, though this time the whispers carried a different weight, a mixture of confusion, sympathy, and quiet respect for a woman who had chosen to walk away rather than continue enduring a bond built on uncertainty. Elena did not stay to witness the fallout. Within days, she had gathered what few belongings she called her own, said her farewells to Marla and the small handful of pack members who had come to genuinely respect her, and set off toward the southern territories where her family's abandoned lands waited beneath years of neglect and overgrowth. Meanwhile, within Blackthorn territory, the careful foundation Serafina Cole had spent years constructing began, slowly but surely, to crack apart. It started with a young warrior named Owen, one of the few pack members who had witnessed the true events of the harvest gathering firsthand. He had remained silent during the initial confrontation, uncertain of his place in speaking against someone as established as Serafina, but as days passed and guilt gnawed at his conscience, he finally approached Corwin privately, offering an account that directly contradicted Serafina's version of events. "I was standing close enough to see everything clearly," Owen explained, his voice steady despite the nervousness evident in his posture. Elena never moved from the head table. I watched Serafina approach Damien, watched her whisper something to him, and then watched her stumble backward on her own, without anyone touching her. I should have spoken sooner. I am sorry I did not. Corwin, who had been among the most vocal skeptics of Elena's innocence during the council meeting, received this new testimony with the same careful scrutiny he applied to every serious matter within the territory. He questioned Owen extensively, cross-referenced his account against the memories of several other guests who had been standing nearby that evening, and slowly began to piece together a picture entirely different from the one Serafina had so convincingly presented. Marla, too, continued her quiet investigation into the old healing records, eventually locating an elderly wolf named Thaddeus, who had served as a tracker during the years surrounding Serafina's claimed rogue wolf attack. When approached carefully, Thaddeus revealed that he had been assigned to search the northern border extensively following the incident, and had found no evidence whatsoever of a rogue wolf's presence in the area, no tracks, no scent trails, nothing to substantiate the attack Serafina had described in such vivid, tearful detail all those years ago. Piece by piece, the careful construction Serafina had built over the better part of a decade began to collapse under the weight of accumulating evidence. The council, once so quick to extend her sympathy and belief, now found themselves confronting a far more troubling picture, one of calculated manipulation stretching back years, orchestrated with a patience and precision that left even the most experienced council members unsettled. Damien, when finally presented with the full weight of this evidence during a private council session, sat in stunned silence for a long while before speaking. "I need to hear it from her directly," he said finally, his voice hollow with the particular exhaustion of a man confronting the full scope of his own misplaced trust. "I need to give her the chance to explain." Serafina was summoned to the council chamber that same evening, and Elena's absence from the proceedings felt, to everyone present, like a heavy and deliberate silence, a reminder of exactly what her honesty had cost her, while Serafina's deception had cost her nothing at all, until now. When confronted with Owen's testimony, with Thaddeus's account of the empty northern border, with Marla's careful analysis of the old healing records, Serafina's practiced composure finally began to crack, the fragile mask she had worn so convincingly for years, slipping to reveal something far colder underneath. "You would believe them over me?" she said, her voice losing its familiar tremor, sharpening into something Damien had never heard from her before. "After everything I have done for you, everything I have sacrificed to remain close to you all these years." "What exactly did you sacrifice, Serafina?" Damien asked quietly, his voice carrying the weight of a man finally seeing clearly what had been hidden from him for so long. "Tell me the truth. Did you injure yourself all those years ago?" Serafina's silence, stretching long and heavy across the council chamber, answered the question more completely than any words could have. "I did what I had to do," she said finally, her voice quiet, but no longer trembling with practiced fragility. "You were always going to choose duty over me otherwise. I needed you to see me as someone worth protecting, worth prioritizing. I did not expect it to take years. I did not expect her to arrive and threaten everything I had built. You accused an innocent woman of striking you, Damien said, his voice rising now with a fury he had rarely allowed himself to show. You cost her the position she earned through months of honest work. You made me doubt someone who never once gave me reason to distrust her. Because she was never supposed to matter this much, Serafina replied, something bitter and raw finally breaking through the careful mask she had maintained for so long. I built my place in this pack around your loyalty to me, Damien. I was not going to simply step aside because fate decided to bind you to someone else. The council chamber fell into stunned silence at the admission. The full weight of Serafina's years of calculated manipulation finally laid bare before everyone present. Damien sat motionless at the head of the chamber, grief and anger warring visibly across his features as he confronted the true cost of his misplaced trust. You will leave Blackthorn territory, he said finally, his voice quiet, but carrying an authority that left no room for negotiation. Effective immediately, what you have done here cannot be forgiven, cannot be excused by whatever pain shaped you into someone capable of this kind of deception. Serafina did not argue, did not weep, did not offer any further performance. She simply nodded once, her expression finally settling into something honest for the first time in the council's memory, before turning and walking from the chamber without another word. In the weeks that followed, Damien threw himself into the difficult work of rebuilding trust within his pack, of publicly acknowledging the harm his hesitation had caused Elena, of restructuring council procedures to ensure that no accusation, no matter how tearfully delivered, would ever again be allowed to bypass proper investigation. But no amount of reform could undo what had already been lost, and Damien found himself, more nights than he cared to admit, standing alone in the eastern garden where his final conversation with Elena had taken place, wondering if there was any path forward that might lead him back to her. He gathered word of her whereabouts slowly, carefully, learning from traveling merchants and distant contacts that Elena Whitmore had indeed reached her family's southern lands, that she had begun the difficult work of reclaiming territory long abandoned, that pack members from scattered corners of the region had begun, slowly, to hear of her efforts and travel south to join her cause. 6 months after her departure, Damien finally made the journey south himself, uncertain of what he might find, uncertain of whether he had any right to hope for forgiveness after everything his hesitation had cost them both. The southern territory looked nothing like the neglected, overgrown land Elena had first encountered upon her arrival months earlier. Where crumbling stone walls had once stood buried beneath years of untended vines, sturdy new structures now rose against the horizon, built by hands that had traveled from scattered corners of the region to answer the quiet call of a bloodline finally reclaiming its place in the world. Damien stood at the edge of the territory, taking in the transformation with a mixture of awe and hesitation, uncertain of the welcome that awaited him. He did not have to search long before he found her. Elena stood near the center of the newly rebuilt training grounds, directing a group of warriors through a series of exercises with the calm, steady authority of someone who had fully grown into her own strength. She wore simple clothing suited to the physical demands of rebuilding a territory from nothing, her hair pulled back practically, her posture carrying none of the uncertainty that had once marked her early days at Blackthorn. She noticed him before he had crossed half the distance toward her, and for a long moment, they simply stood there, studying each other across the space that had grown between them over the past 6 months. Damien, she said finally, her voice carrying neither hostility nor warmth, only a calm acknowledgement of his presence. Elena, he replied, stopping a respectful distance away. This place, you have built something remarkable here. We have built something remarkable, she corrected gently. I did not do this alone. Marla joined me shortly after I settled here. Owen followed, not long after, along with a dozen others who believed in what we were trying to build. Damien nodded, taking in the sight of the territory once more. The sturdy walls, the well-tended training grounds, the quiet sense of purpose that seemed to permeate every corner of the rebuilt land. I heard what happened, he said quietly, the truth about Serafina. I wanted you to know that everything came out eventually. Owen's testimony, Thaddeus's account, Marla's records. She admitted everything, in the end. I heard as well, Elena replied, though her expression remained carefully neutral. Marla kept in contact with some of the pack members who remained loyal to us. I am glad the truth finally emerged, though I confess, it brought me less satisfaction than I might have expected. Why is that? Damien asked. Because the truth emerging does not undo the months I spent fighting to be believed, Elena said, her voice steady despite the weight of the words. It does not restore the trust that should have been extended to me from the beginning, without requiring proof at every turn. Damien absorbed this, guilt evident in the tightness of his jaw, the way his shoulders remained slightly hunched, as though carrying a weight he had not yet managed to set down. I know I cannot undo what happened, he said finally. I know that no apology, however sincere, can fully repair the damage my hesitation caused. But I needed to come here, Elena, to tell you how deeply sorry I am, and to see with my own eyes what you have built since leaving. Elena studied him for a long moment, searching his face for the sincerity behind his words. She found it there, genuine and unmistakable, though it no longer carried the power over her that it once might have. I appreciate you coming, she said finally. And I accept your apology, Damien. I told you before I left that I forgave you, and that remains true. But forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. I understand, Damien said quietly, though the resignation in his voice suggested he had hoped, perhaps against reason, for something more. This territory, Elena continued, gesturing toward the rebuilt structures surrounding them, represents something I did not fully understand about myself before I left Blackthorn. I spent so long believing my worth depended on being chosen, being protected, being validated by someone else's promise. I understand now that my worth was never something that needed to be granted by anyone else at all. Damien nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of her words. You have grown a great deal since I saw you last. I have, Elena agreed, a small, genuine smile finally touching her lips. This place, this pack we are rebuilding, it belongs to no one's promise but my own. Every wall built here, every warrior trained, every decision made, it all flows from strength I discovered within myself, not strength granted through a bond with anyone else. Is there any part of you, Damien asked carefully, that wonders what might have been, if things had gone differently at Blackthorn? Elena considered the question honestly before responding. Sometimes, she admitted, I loved you, Damien. That love was real, and I do not regret the time we shared, even with everything that followed. But I have also come to understand that the love I feel for myself now, the respect I have built through my own strength and effort, matters more to me than any bond I might have continued clinging to out of fear of being alone. Damien was silent for a long moment, watching her with an expression that mixed grief with something closer to genuine admiration. You deserve every bit of what you have built here, he said finally. I am sorry it took losing you for me to fully understand that. Thank you for saying that, Elena replied. I mean that sincerely. They stood together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the warriors continue their training exercises nearby, the sound of laughter and effort filling the crisp afternoon air. Eventually Marla approached, offering Damien a respectful nod before turning to Elena. The council is gathering for the evening meeting, she said. They're waiting for your guidance on the eastern boundary expansion. Elena nodded, turning back to Damien with a small, genuine smile. I have responsibilities to attend to. This territory does not build itself, even with everyone's hard work. Of course, Damien said, understanding clearly that this conversation, and perhaps this chapter of their shared history, was drawing to its natural close. Thank you for allowing me to see this place, Elena. Thank you for hearing me out. Safe travels back to Blackthorn, Elena replied, and there was genuine warmth in her voice, the kind that came from someone who had truly made peace with the past, rather than simply burying it beneath resentment. As Damien turned to leave, retracing his steps back toward the northern road that would carry him home, Elena watched him go with a quiet sense of closure settling over her chest. She did not feel the old ache of loss she might have expected, nor did she feel triumphant satisfaction at his obvious regret. She felt, instead, simply at peace, grounded firmly in the life she had built for herself, independent of any promise that had once felt so essential to her survival. She turned back toward the council meeting awaiting her, toward the warriors continuing their training exercises, toward the sturdy walls and thriving fields that represented months of her own determination and strength. The Whitmore bloodline, once scattered and forgotten, once dismissed as too weak to matter, now stood reclaimed and rebuilding, led by a woman who had learned, through painful experience, that true strength came not from being chosen by someone else, but from choosing herself, fully and completely, even when that choice meant walking away from everything she had once believed she needed. As evening settled over the Southern Territory, lanterns beginning to glow warm against the gathering dusk, Elena Whitmore stood at the center of the life she had built entirely on her own terms, and for the first time since that night beneath the stars at Blackthorn so long ago, she felt no absence, no longing for a promise once made and broken. She felt only the quiet, unshakable certainty of a woman who had finally, completely, become her own.